Proverbs 3 verse 5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." But this is much easier to say than it actually is to do. In Jeremiah 29 verse 11 says, "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." But I have to admit, I used to really hate this verse. And the reason why I used to hate this verse was because I didn't trust it. And the reason why I didn't trust it had to do with my own understanding, my own perspective on things. And my perspective was this. See, I would look at the life of the prophet Jeremiah, the man who God used to speak this verse, and I would think to myself, how cheeky. How cheeky of God to make the prophet Jeremiah say these words about hope, about not being harmed, about having a future. And yet this was a man who was imprisoned, who was thrown down a well in an attempt to kill him, and who for the most part of his ministry was ignored. Now I used to look at the life of Jeremiah, and I used to think, how can I trust God to give me a plan to prosper me and not to harm me, when I can't even see that in the man who delivered those words himself? Now God's changed my perspective on this, and I no longer see things in this way. And now instead of only seeing pain and persecution, I now also see protection. You see, Jeremiah was imprisoned in a place called the courtyard of the guard. He was imprisoned in a place called the courtyard of the guard at a time when people from inside the city of Jerusalem were trying to kill him, and outside of the city walls was the Babylonian army. But yet where was he? He was in the safest place he could have been, a place where the barracks meet the palace. See, in the past I'd only seen pain and I'd only seen persecution. But now when I looked at the life of Jeremiah, I also saw protection. And not only did I see protection, but I also saw provision. Because the whole time that Jeremiah was imprisoned, the whole time that he was imprisoned in the courtyard of the guard, the king had promised that he was to be fed a loaf of bread from the baker's street. And so Jeremiah, at a time when everyone else was starving because the food supply of the city had been cut off, Jeremiah, at a time where we read in Ezekiel describing the situation that people were in such desperate need that they would cook their measly bits of food over their own poo, during this great time of famine and starvation, Jeremiah would have been one of the best fed people in the entire city. Proverbs 3 verse 5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." And so I urge you, don't trust in your perspective. Don't trust in your perspective. And the reason I say this is because I'm pretty sure that Jeremiah's perspective on the situation wasn't very good. I'm pretty sure that when he was stuck down in that well or in that cistern, and he had people who were trying to kill him, who were trying to starve him out, that he could be able to look up and he'd only see this little bit of light, but he had no idea what was going on around him. When you're in that place of that well and everything is hopeless and everything's pressed in around you, you have no idea what's going on around you, and it's very easy to lose hope. But the fact of the matter is, God's perspective is much bigger than ours. He knows what is going on a much grander scale than we do. And he knows how he has positioned his pieces, not for our harm, but for our good. You see, God has a plan, and his plan is to prosper us. Now, this does not mean that we are never going to go through pain and persecution. In fact, the Bible promises that those who follow him will come across persecution. You look at the life of Jesus, and he did not avoid pain and persecution. You look at the lives of the disciples, and they did not avoid pain and persecution. In fact, Jesus even said that if they treat me this way, what makes you think that they're not going to treat you in the same way also? No, as Christians we will face difficult times. But during those difficult times, God's purpose is not to have us be harmed. Instead, during those difficult times, we still see God's protection and God's provision. But not only that, but while Jeremiah was stuck inside that prison, he was able to continue on his purpose as a prophet. He was able to continue on in his ministry. Now I only saw pain and persecution, but now I saw protection, provision, purpose, and also position. See, the people, they largely ignored Jeremiah. They didn't want to hear what he had to say. And now, thousands of years later, although those people back then never listened to him, we're listening to him now. He has his name as one of the books of the Bible. Yes, God had plans to prosper him. Yes, he went through pain. Yes, he went through persecution. But God also gave him protection, provision, purpose, position, and also power. Power to continue on. Power to persevere and do what it was that God had planned for him to do. And this is the same for us. Don't trust in your own perspective. Because quite often when we're in the midst of things, when things are difficult, our perspective can be very, very narrow, and we can be like Jeremiah, stuck down that well. We don't know what's going on around us. But God's plans are bigger. God's perspective is bigger. And his intention for us is not to harm us, but to give us a hope and to give us a future. Thank you.